Shalom, everyone. Today we are going to finish our final part in the Kashrut series that we are doing on the Torah, which is the dietary laws. The last two videos that we have done, we have been largely looking at the Kashrut, or the dietary laws, from a biblical perspective, meaning we've been looking at the scriptures in the Renewed Covenant or New Testament scriptures, namely the writings of Shaul, to understand exactly what the context and the perspective of Shaul's writings, and understanding that he was not teaching against the Kashrut, the dietary laws, or Torah as a whole. He himself observed it, he kept it. The assemblies, even the Gentile assemblies that he helped to found, they also observed the precepts of Torah. We find this throughout Slickum, the book of Acts. We find it echoed in Shaul's writings. As we've already talked about though throughout this long series, I'm not going to go back and repeat those things. Go back and watch them for yourself. It's been a very long, extensive series so far. But the last two parts of this Kashrut dietary law series, we have been looking at disproving why that some people think that the Renewed Covenant or New Testament scriptures show some sort of evidentiary basis to support the conclusion that the dietary laws, or again the Kashrut, was done away with. When we break down the Torah of Yah, it's broken down into 5 major categories, which we've also talked about before: the ceremonial, sacrificial law, the commercial law, the judgment law, the dietary laws, laws that were governing the interactions between the people of Israel. So between the 4 or 5 main categories that the Torah was broken down into, the only section of Torah that Yahshua fulfilled, as he said, "For I came not to destroy but to fulfill," was the ordinances that prescribed sacrifice for the ceremonial or sacrificial parts of the law, so animal sacrifices, etc. All of the rest of the aspects of Torah were not done away with by the sacrifice of Yahshua, which was proven and echoed, and that his disciples continued to observe all the rest of Torah, the Moedim, the feasts, the Shabbat, the dietary laws. They continued to observe every other facet of Torah, as we find throughout Slickum, the book of Acts, and then, of course, even echoed in Shaul's writings. We find, I believe it was the believers in either Colossians, or Galatia from Galatians, in which the people were actually still themselves in that assembly. They were observing the new moons and the feasts. They were eating and drinking as prescribed to the manner in accordance with Torah. So we looked at the last 2 parts of the series why that it is an erroneous and illogical assumption and factually incorrect to say that the Kashrut, the dietary laws, just as with the other facets of Torah, were done away with by the Renewed Covenant establishment. What we're going to do now in part 3 is we're going to break down the scientific and biological reasons behind why the Father commands us to eat animals that we eat, why that we are to abstain from the ones that we are to abstain from, concerning birds of prey, pretty much any and all crustacean, pork, that's a big one, especially today. The world just runs on pork. We are going to look at the scientific reasons behind this, because, as I've said before, Father does not command us to do anything in his Torah that does not have logical, practical significance. And it is usually for our health, it's for our safety, it's for our well-being, it's also for the well-being of our ecological foundation, meaning the natural ecology, the natural world around us, for our environment. Father's laws all have a very particular reason concerning why he told us to observe the things that we are to observe and abstain the things that we are to abstain from. And I would make the argument to anyone any day that the reason why that one reason why the world is so rife with disease today, why our environment is so completely upside down on its head, is because of the fact that we did not observe the Torah of Yah, which prescribes to us how we are to live a healthy, productive life, not just in our I almost said relations, our relations and our interactions. There we go. But I guess that's the word works too, relations. So if you want to say interactions and relations and one, just say relations. I'm putting my seal on that word. If you use it, just give me royalties. But whether it's our interactions with other people, our relationships with other people, whether it's how that we are to even take up our responsibility and the governorship that we were given over animals, over the animal kingdom, or how we are to be stewards of the environment, the world that we live in. If we go by Father's Torah, we are going to know exactly how we are to live, because in every way the Torah is meant to help us learn how to live not just a righteous life, or not just live a life that is pleasing in Father's eyes, but more importantly, how we are to live a life that is productive and healthy, edifying to each of us, to Father's greatest creation, which is man, that he put in this world. So with that presumption having been laid firmly on the table, in that Father commands us to do all that we do for a practical reason, we are now going to look into the scientific, biological reasons behind why that the animals that were prescribed to be eaten as clean were designated as such, and why animals that were designated as unclean were designated as such. Now, these articles that I read, if you would like to have them yourself to go over them, please ask me and I will happily share them with you. These are actually going to be some articles that I found, so it's a couple. We're going to start with the first one. If at any point you have any questions on anything and you feel like maybe you're not going to be able to wait until the video is over, then I recommend you pause the video, go into the comment section, and write down or start making a bullet point and list of questions you have to ask me. That will be the best way to do it. So without any further ado, let's begin. Perceptive scholars have recognized that the dietary laws and the Torah as a whole express Elohim's will and represent wise, reasonable, and beneficial measures revealing, quote, Elohim's care for the health of his people. Sadly, most people today, including theologians, have little or no understanding of the sound medical reasons behind Elohim's instructions, because the scientific wisdom behind the biblical dietary laws is seldom taught or explained. Instead, these laws are commonly viewed as antiquated First Covenant or Old Testament regulations for the Yehudim, Jews, that are no longer applicable for believers, Christians, or the general public. However, as Erdman's Handbook to the Bible comments, the list of clean and unclean animals in Leviticus chapter 11, or Wikra, and Deuteronomy 14, have a significance often ignored. Far from being a catalog of food taboos based on fad or fancy, these lists emphasize a fact not discovered until late in the last century, hear that animals carry diseases dangerous to man. In fact, the same animals labeled unclean in Scripture still carry parasitic diseases that are dangerous to human beings today. Despite these important scientific facts, many theologians and secular scholars have dismissively referred to the dietary guidelines in Wikra, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy as meaningless, repulsive, arbitrary, irrational ideas that originated in primitive superstitions, not in the mind of Elohim. They have even asked, what has all this to do with religion? Scripture reveals several important reasons for the dietary laws. In Shemoth, Exodus, we learn that Elohim chose the nation of Israel, and set them apart for a special purpose, such as, and you can look these scriptures up for yourself, I'm not going to read each one, you can catalog them down, look them up, such as in Shemoth, Exodus 19, 5, 6. And the dietary laws contributed to that divine purpose, as in, quote, I am Yah your Elohim, who has separated you from the peoples. You shall therefore distinguish between clean beasts and unclean, and you shall be Kodesh, or holy, to me, for I, Yah, am holy, Kodesh, and have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine. This was found in Wikra, Leviticus 20, verses 24 through 26. Living according to Elohim's divine laws should have made Israel a model nation, a light and example to the world, as nations saw the enrichments they enjoyed, including enrichments of good health. And this conveying of the enrichments that the people of Israel would receive for doing such, you can find in Deuteronomy 7:15. As we will see, not only will the dietary laws contribute to the Israelites' good health, they would promote wise and efficient management of environmental resources. Understood this way, the distinction between clean and unclean animals plays a role in helping us tend and keep the land as good stewards of Elohim's creation. Proof that we are stewards of his creation is found in Bereshith, Genesis 1, verse 28 and 2:15. Indeed, to fully grasp the significance of the biblical dietary laws, we must see them in the context of Elohim's overall purpose for mankind. Wayikra, Leviticus 11, and Deuteronomy 14 are the primary passages in the Bible that describe the dietary laws. These chapters provide very specific information summarized in simple, easy to understand principles that could be applied long before the microscope was invented and long before germ theory was proposed. Today, the discoveries of modern science are revealing just how important and practical these laws really are. Beginning in Wayikra, Leviticus 11, we read that Elohim told Moses, and Aaron, to inform the Israelites, "These are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. Among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves and chewing the cud, that you may eat," as in verses 1 through 3. Plant-eating animals, herbivores, that fit this description are called ruminants. These animals have four-chambered stomachs that convert grasses that are inedible to humans and other animals into nutritious, high-quality protein products, meat and milk, that people can then use for food. Examples of clean animals would be all cattle, sheep, goats, deer, bison, moose, antelope, gazelles, caribou, and giraffes. They are all divided hoof herbivores that obtain their food by grazing or browsing on grasses and other plants. So one of the main things that makes a ruminant animal so unique is that their ability to maximize through their four-chambered stomach the edible green food that they ingest gives them the ability to, through one such process in their four-chambered stomach, it essentially regurgitates the food up into their mouth, and they're able to chew it again to properly digest it and therefore get all the nutrients out when it goes through the second time. This process of rumination is what allows animals that are considered clean, such as cattle, to produce products that we partake of on a regular basis, such as milk, as well as what makes their meat in particular so much better to eat for us than animals that are non-ruminant, that do not have that complex digestive system. From the standpoint of wise environmental management, these guidelines make a lot of sense. Vast areas of the globe are covered by rangelands, which is to say savannas, veldts, and pampas. And specifically, a veldt is an open, uncultivated country or grassland in southern Africa, conventionally divided by altitude into high veld, middle veld, and low veld, and pampas, which are categorized as fertile low grasslands in southern South America, so basically grasslands, fertile plains, which are often called marginal lands because they do not have enough rainfall to support the production of food crops like corn or wheat. Cattle, sheep, and goats have the ability to convert plant carbohydrates and proteins into available nutrients for human use, making otherwise unusable land productive. So a lot of times pastoral animals that will be put out in pasture land like this, which was otherwise maybe due to a lack of proper hydration, not enough rainfall, these animals and grazing on this land, this is what we call cattle land, it made use of an otherwise inhospitable, worthless land for us, because having cattle go out and pasture these areas and feed gives them the ability to in turn properly digest the substance that they are eating, which in turn gives us benefit in the milk they produce and also in the meat that we eat from these animals. The clean animals that Elohim permitted his model nation to eat easily discerned by split hooves and cud chewing, were designed to produce nutritious food in an economical and ecologically sound manner. These guidelines were a key benefit that Elohim wanted the world to see through the example of Israel. The dietary laws regarding cud-chewing beasts also prohibit the consumption of all carnivorous animals for very logical reasons. Elohim created unclean animals, unsuitable for human consumption for many other purposes. Carnivores, as beasts of prey, play an important role in controlling the populations of other animals. Listen to this. As an example, wolves and mountain lions, which feed on herds of deer, not only control numbers, but also help maintain the herd's health by culling out, basically wiping out, killing, older, sick, or infirm animals. That is one reason why we should not eat carnivores. They may eat sick animals and transmit diseases to humans. The pig or swine is specifically mentioned in Scripture as unclean and unfit to be human food. See how we said yesterday that Shaul never would have categorized food unclean by Torah as food, so he never would have called pork or anything like that food. By his definition, it wasn't food. Well, here, unclean and unfit to be human food. So these unclean animals are not even labeled as food. And where we find these unclean and unfit animals would be in Leviticus 11, 7 through 8, and Deuteronomy 14:8. While some theologians have stated, quote, "We do not know why the swine was forbidden," others find numerous reasons related to ecology, economics, nutrition, and public health. In the wild, swine are often nocturnal animals that root for food. Their nighttime feeding habits would keep contact with humans at a minimum. Domesticated pigs, however, have been used for centuries as scavengers around human settlements. Having an omnivorous animal, omnivorous meaning an animal that is both plant-based in diet and also protein-based or meat-based, so they'll eat vegetation as well as meat. Having an omnivorous animal like the pig around that can put on weight rapidly by eating anything from simple grain to garbage, dead animals, and human waste products, and that can later be slaughtered and used for food, seem like a pretty good arrangement to many peoples. But is it? The similarities between human and pig digestive tracts make them ecological competitors for many of the same types of food, resulting in a great deal of corn and other grains to be diverted to feed hogs in order to satisfy society's craving for pork, instead of feeding humans themselves more directly and more efficiently, which you think about it is true. Just in the United States alone, the consumption of pork is off the chain. Everywhere you go, in your local grocery store, if you go to a restaurant, everything anymore is bacon flavored. Pork is a huge commercial product within the livestock-based industry. And it's true. You think about with all the people that live in the world right now, just in the United States alone, and you think about how many swine, how many hogs are in this world, in just this country, to feed and satiate people's desire for swine meat, for pork. Because of the fact that humans and pigs both have a very similar digestive tract, meaning, again, pigs eat a lot of the same things that we do, including grain and corn. If we stopped eating pork tomorrow, if pigs were no longer farmed, if they were no longer used for human consumption and farmed as such, so they were no longer being fed corn and grain by farmers, think of how much that would save in corn and grain, and how much more of those resources we could put into human consumption, or even just split between human consumption or to other farm animals. It would save massively on our natural agricultural produce. And maybe, just maybe, we would not have to, farmers would not be forced to put chemicals onto their fields to make crops grow faster today, like they do, which puts our health at risk by extension, because our products, our grain, our corn, the agricultural produce we are eating is being pumped full of chemicals to make it grow faster for the mass rate of consumption that it's needed for us, for farm animals, for pigs. So no longer is our agricultural produce being grown at a natural rate as it should be, but they're being chemically induced, which is very unhealthy. The more poison and toxins that we put into something, and we eat those things, you are what you eat. And I am a strong advocate. That is one of the reasons why the human genome, the human genetic code today is so much weaker. People in general are so much healthier, so much weaker, and so much more predisposed to disease and sickness than ever before. Because in so many ways, I mean, we're putting poisons into our body left and right. We're putting poison into our body through we're growing our crops with, the medicines we're taking, the vaccinations we're always taking, the over-the-counter medications we're taking, what's being put into our food. We're always spraying for bugs in our home and our workplaces. We're spraying weeds in our yard, and that chemical is soaking down into the ground, especially if you have a natural well like we do here at my house, and it trickles down into the water supply. So regardless, think about that. If we did not feed swine, if they were no longer being used for human consumption, how much we could save on grain and corn. But pigs are not the only animal that the Bible warns us to avoid eating. Rabbits and rodents can transmit tularemia, also called rabbit fever, deer fly fever, and tick fever, to humans who come into contact with meat and body fluids from these animals. And for a rodent, this is important to note, a rodent is specifically classified not just as a rat or a mouse, but anything within the rodent family. This also includes chipmunks and squirrels. So squirrels are also most definitively unclean to eat. This bacterial disease is endemic, which, for your benefit, endemic specifically means of a disease regularly occurring within an area or community. This bacterial disease is endemic in North America and across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. It can also be transmitted by tick or mosquitoes that bite an infected animal and then bite human beings. So, again, tularemia is transmitted in this way. Biblical dietary guidelines also prohibit eating bats and monkeys, which have been implicated as the source of the Ebola virus that has emerged with devastating effects in equatorial Africa, where both bats and primates are consumed as bush meat. Bats and camels have been implicated in Middle East respiratory syndrome, or MERS. In fact, consuming unclean animals such as bats, pigs, civets, and a civet specifically, is a nocturnal mammal found mainly in Asia and Africa. They're actually quite cute. And various other exotic but unclean animals has been implicated in the possible origins of many modern flu epidemics and pandemics of our time, such as, again, and I'm going to read this one more time. In fact, consuming unclean animals such as bats, pigs, civets, and other exotic but unclean animals has been implicated in the possible origins of many modern flu epidemics and pandemics of our time, such as severe acute respiratory syndrome, also known as SARS, swine flu, and, ding ding ding, the coronavirus that gave the world COVID-19. Virologist Michael Lai has noted, the fact that both SARS and most flu viruses originated in southern China is no surprise, citing the custom of those in the region to eat such wild, unclean animals. Lai highlights that SARS is suspected by some to have moved from animals to humans after first mixing with a human virus that may have been brewing in another animal, such as a pig. Trichinosis, caused by a small parasitic roundworm that gets into muscle tissue, is one of the many major diseases transmitted by swine and other unclean animals. It is a global disease infesting approximately 11 million people. This is not surprising, considering that pork has long been the most popular meat in the world, only recently surpassed by poultry. On average, each American consumes more than 50 pounds, or 23 kilograms of pork every year. Pigs are not alone, however, and many carnivorous and omnivorous animals are infected with the parasite Trachinella spiralis. In addition to pork, bear and walrus meat have both served as significant sources of infections in humans. The list of unclean animals that transmit this parasite to people in their meat includes squirrels, rats, cats, dogs, rabbits, foxes, panthers, lions, and horses. It is hardly an accident or coincidence that Elohim prohibited the consumption of these animals. Tapeworms, known properly as tania, which afflict about 100 million people worldwide, are another serious health problem. While beef and fish can contain tapeworms that will colonize the human digestive tract and cause discomfort, the pork tapeworm is much more dangerous. The larva of the pork parasite, once inside the human intestine, can migrate through the tissues to the heart, eyes, and brain, and eventually can cause death. Pork tapeworm infections, quote, are more prevalent in underdeveloped communities with poor sanitation where people eat raw or undercooked pork in Latin America, Eastern Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia. And what's funny is a lot of people out here today, even in areas that are more hygienic, even here in the West, where we have more strict laws and regulations on things such as sanitation, how many people like eating pork, for instance, that's not all that well done? My mother is one of the only people that I know, back when she used to eat pork, before she stopped, she's one of the only people I ever knew that would literally have her bacon burnt to a crisp where it would literally just fall apart in your hands. Most people don't eat pork like that. There are a lot of people that eat pork that is not fully completely done or fatty. Although the general medical advice for avoiding parasitic infections from animals is to adequately cook the meat, the most effective way to avoid these diseases is to avoid eating unclean animals that do not, have cloven hooves and do not chew the cud, as Elohim instructed Moses, and the Israelites 3,500 years ago. If this portion alone of the biblical dietary code were applied today, listen to this, the global burden of parasitic disease could be dramatically reduced within a generation. After dealing with edible land animals, the second major set of divine dietary instructions concerned aquatic creatures. Scripture instructs in Leviticus 11:9 and also in 12. These you may eat of all that are in the water. Whatever in the water has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. Whatever in the water does not have fins or scales, that should be an abomination to you. These divinely ordained biblical guidelines were designed to point people to the safest kinds of fish to eat. Biblically clean fish generally swim free in bodies of water. Most unclean fish are either bottom dwellers or predatory scavengers. The prohibition against eating fish that have no scales protects against the consumption of fish that often produce poisonous substances in their bodies. A U.S. Army Survival Manual comments, most poisonous fish have many similar physical characteristics. Generally, they are odd-shaped, box-like or almost round, and have hard skin, often covered with bony plates or spines, tiny mouths, small gills, and small or absent belly fins. Many sea creatures noted for being venomous, that is to say, for example, 4 sharks, 58 stingrays, 47 types of catfish, 57 scorpionfish, and 15 toadfish, do not have true scales. Eels, nocturnal predatory scavengers that eat almost any animal, food, dead or alive, would also be considered unclean because they lack scales. Eel blood contains a toxic substance which can be dangerous if it comes into contact with eyes or another mucous membrane. Shellfish, lacking both fins and scales, are clearly excluded by the biblical dietary laws. But why would lobsters, crabs, crayfish, and shrimp, considered delicacies in much of the world, be prohibited? The answer lies in understanding the role they were designed to play in nature. Lobsters are nocturnal foragers. They are bottom-dwelling predatory scavengers that eat dead creatures and other bottom-dwelling organisms and debris. They are usually caught in lobster pots baited with dead fish. Lobsters have long antennae and tiny hair-like sensors all over their bodies that can detect specific chemical molecules in the environment, which are released by decaying organisms, which can help the lobster identify and locate food even in the dark. Lobsters have also been observed to bury a dead fish and then dig it up later at intervals to eat a bit more of it. Crabs have been called professional garbage hunters as they are scavengers that eat almost anything. The crab prefers dead fish but will eat any carrion. And specifically, the term carrion is just the decaying flesh of dead animals. That's it. Common shrimp live by day in the mud or sandy bottoms of bays and estuaries. And an estuary specifically is a partially enclosed coastal body of brackish water where fresh water from rivers or streams meets and mixes with salt water from the open sea. Common shrimp live by day in the mud or sandy bottoms of bays and estuaries, but by night become active as predatory scavengers and are bottom-dwelling detritus feeders. And detritus means organic matter made up of the decomposing remains of organisms and plant material and also of feces. So that's what detritus is. And that's what they feed on, shrimp. These organisms were all created for a very important ecological purpose. They are, in essence, the garbage collectors or the cleanup crew for the bottoms of lakes, rivers, bays, and oceans. They were neither designed nor intended to be food for human beings. There were also important and logical reasons why Elohim created clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops, and then labeled them unclean and inappropriate for human consumption. These creatures are found in lakes, streams, and coastal areas where they perform specialized roles. As stationary filter-feeding mollusks, they pump large amounts of water over their mucus-covered gills, trapping tiny pieces of food, for example, silt, plant debris, bacteria, and viruses, which they then eat. As a result, some consider mussels and similar organisms the sea's ultimate scavengers. Filter-feeding organisms are the vacuum cleaners for aquatic environments. Their role is to purify the water. Once you understand the purpose for which Elohim created shellfish, the reason they are considered unclean should become obvious. Most of us would be reluctant to make a meal from the contents of our vacuum cleaner bag, or from the material that collects on our furnace filter or septic tank. This well describes the role of shellfish. Because shellfish feed by filtering the water that washes over the shellfish bed, they can accumulate disease causing bacteria and viruses that are harmful to people. How serious is the threat of disease from shellfish? The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has stated that raw oysters, clams, and mussels, so savored by gourmet, account for 85% of all the illnesses caused by eating seafood. Outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, hepatitis A, Norwalk virus, salmonella, and paralytic shellfish poisoning are just some of the health problems frequently linked to the consumption of these mollusks. Perhaps this is why Norwalk virus breaks out from time to time on cruise ships where these mollusks are commonly served. Public health authorities have recommended that pregnant women, the elderly, and individuals with immune system weakened by certain diseases such as cancer, diabetes, and AIDS, should avoid eating or handling uncooked shellfish. Dangerous and potentially life-threatening consequences can be avoided by understanding and following the biblical dietary laws, or Kashrut, that prohibit eating marine organisms lacking fins and scales. The final groups of organisms covered by the biblical code are birds, insects, and reptiles. Essentially, all the unclean fowl are either birds of prey or scavengers, like vultures and seagulls, as found in Reikra Leviticus 11:13-19. Carnivorous birds are important in controlling populations of other animals. Their habit of eating the flesh and blood of their prey make these birds potential agents for transmitting disease. Predatory fish-eating birds, for example, eagles, tend to accumulate high levels of toxic chemicals in their bodies. Most of these birds are not important food sources for humans. Reptiles are also among the animals listed as unfit for human food, as found in Leviticus 11:29 through 30, as well as 42 through 43. Regarding insects, only those from the locust and grasshopper family are permissible as food, as seen in verses 21 and 23. These creatures are distinguished by having strong hind legs for springing and historically have been a food source in the Middle East. And we covered before why that was in, I think, the video before the last one, and I think it was part 1 of the Kashrut, the Dietary Laws, where we talked about it was only very specific forms of grasshoppers or locusts. Very specific. It wasn't all of them, so if you were to see a locust or grasshopper out here in the yard today and you were to go and eat one, that's not a clean one. It was only very specific ones, and it was most likely because that those particular dietary accepted forms of locust or grasshoppers probably had a very unique form of biology that allowed them to be eaten that was different from their kin. But again, that's a very specific type. Most, even Hebraic Torah observant Jews today, do not eat grasshoppers or locusts. Only really the Yemenite Yehudim or the Yemenite Jews of today, the Sephardic people of Israel, actually have maintained a knowledge of what forms of grasshoppers or locusts are still edible, what species in the Middle East, but even they hardly don't ever eat them. I mean, obviously, who wants to eat a bug? The consumption of blood as found, or the consumption of blood as food, is also forbidden by the biblical dietary laws, or Kashrut. This is found in Leviticus 3:7, as well as in chapter 7, verses 26 through 27. Yet, depending on your culture, it might come as a surprise to learn that animal blood is used in preparing many traditional foods, from black pudding in the United Kingdom and blood sausage, also known as Blutwurst, in Germany and other parts of Europe, all the way to Dietary in Asia, which is a pudding made from the raw blood of animals such as pigs or ducks. Some in the nutrition industry even advocate for the use of blood as a food, seeing it as a wasted product of slaughterhouses, a potential superfood, and another way to profit off the meat industry. However, most advocates make little mention of the health risks involved in making and consuming these blood products, and a report detailing the deaths of a number of people who had eaten Tiet Con in celebration of Vietnamese Lunar New Year, Dr. Tran Van Khai of the Vietnam Association of Science, Technology, and Food Safety noted the deadly nature of the practice. The blood carries many diseases from the animals. People eating raw blood from sick pigs can get swine bacteria, worms, and other digestive diseases, while those having blood from sick chicken can be infected with H5N1 or H1N1 viruses. While many theologians believe the First Covenant or Old Testament commands about not eating blood were only for the Yehudim or the Jews and were done away with by Yahshua HaMashiach, first century apostles were still instructing the Renewed Covenant or New Testament believers, including Gentiles, they should not eat blood. That is found in Maas Shlichem, Acts 15:20, verses 28 through 29. As Dr. Kai noted, obeying this biblical health principle can mean the difference between life and death. Now, let's look at some other very important parts. Give me just one moment and we'll be back. Alright, so before we continue on with more reasons why that biologically speaking unclean animals are unclean to eat, something that is a pretty cool little fact about how Father distinguished between clean animals and unclean animals is even the process in which, when it comes to how that the clean animals were originally slaughtered by the people of Israel, by the Kohen, or the Kohanim, the priests, as well as those who actually ate unclean animals, there's a very interesting way in which the clean animals that were edible for food, as well as sacrificial fair. The particular way in which they were to be killed, especially with reference to sacrifices, was through a process known as shikita. The shikita is a procedure in which the windpipe and food pipe is severed in the animal. In practice, one uses a very long, sharp knife, and in cattle, the soft tissues in the neck are sliced through without the knife touching the spinal cord, in the course of which 4 major blood vessels, 2 of which transport oxygenated blood to the brain, the carotid arteries, the other 2 transporting blood back to the heart, jugular veins, are severed. The vagus nerve, or vagus nerve, is also cut in this operation. With fowl, the procedure is followed, but a smaller knife is used. A special knife of considerable length is used. No undue pressure may be applied to the knife, which must be very sharp. The procedure may be performed with the animal either lying on its back or standing. In the case of fowl, with the exception of large fowl like turkey, the bird is held in the non-dominant hand in such a way that the head is pulled back and the neck exposed, while the cut is made with the dominant hand. The procedure is done with the intention of causing a rapid drop in blood pressure in the brain and loss of consciousness, to render the animal insensitive to pain and to exsanguinate, and I'm sure I did not pronounce that correctly, exsanguinate in a prompt and precise action. It has been suggested that eliminating blood flow through the carotid artery does not cut blood flow to the brain of a bovine because the brain is also supplied with blood by vertebral arteries, but other authorities note the distinction between severing the carotid versus merely blocking it. So, the reason why I wanted to read to you how that the clean animals, especially those who weren't just considered clean for consumption, but also in sacrificial customs under the original First Covenant Old Testament sacrificial ceremonial ordinances, which we talked about before, the only part of the Torah that Yahshua's sacrifice actually fulfilled, is because that's going to help you understand this next really cool little fact that scientists actually discovered somewhat recently about the difference between kosher and non-kosher animals, or clean and unclean animals. There is a major difference in the way the blood flows in the species that are kosher and those that are not. In non-kosher mammals, the vertebral arteries flow directly to the brain through the ret mirabile. However, in cloven-hoofed, cud-chewing mammals and permitted fowl, the vertebral arteries drain into the carotid artery and do not have any direct flow to the brain. There will therefore be an immediate drop in blood pressure at the time of shikita, remember that what we talked about, how the procedure was done, that causes the animal to lose consciousness, thus feeling no pain. So that's also really cool, and that the way that Father designed the animals that we are to slaughter and eat, and those that were also by proxy used for sacrifices, he designed them in such a way that when their throat was slit during this shikita process, the execution, the way that the blood would drain out and flow, it would immediately render them into a state of a consciousness where they would feel no pain. So that was Father being very gracious and not allowing these animals to feel the suffering and pain from the execution. And yet again, when you look at non-ruminant animals, unclean animals, they are not biologically similar. They're not made the same way. So they will feel pain. It's very interesting. Now, let's look at another article that further talks about this particular little expose, which, yes, admittedly, especially when you start talking about the diseases, is quite disgusting. All right, give me just one moment, and we will continue. So the following is an extensive list divided into the categories of all the unclean animals, so pigs, rodents, carnivores. Unclean animals, again, pigs, camels, rabbits, dogs, rats, etc. And in order, these animals, from top down, can carry the following pathogens, diseases, and sicknesses. Pigs, swine, high disease risk. The toxins and disease carriers as listed are for the following reasons. Pigs have a poor digestive system that retains toxins. They lack functional sweat glands, preventing detoxification. The expression, sweat like a pig, is untrue. Pigs have to find other ways to cool off, such as in muddy bog holes. Cattle and sheep have much more capacity to sweat and keep cool. Trichinella spiralis parasites causes trichinosis, a severe illness in humans. Pork has high levels of saturated fat and cholesterol, increasing heart disease risk. Pigs can carry swine flu, H1N1, Nipah, hepatitis C, and other zoonotic diseases. Modern pig farming relies on antibiotics, leading to drug-resistant bacteria that can be transmitted to humans. Here are just some diseases that pigs can carry that can also infect humans. Leptospirosis, a disease that can be carried by feral swine. Trichinosis, a food-borne disease caused by a parasite that can be found in raw or undercooked pork. Tapeworm Taenia solium, being the worst tapeworm known to mankind, which has 4 head suckers and 28 hooks that affix the tapeworm to the inside of the small intestine, and it grows up to 28 feet long. Each 1 centimeter section has over 500 tapeworm eggs. The only way of removal is by surgery. Brucellosis, a disease that can be carried by feral swine. Hepatitis, a disease that can be carried by feral swine. Salmonella, a disease that can be carried by feral swine. Swine influenza, a respiratory disease that can be carried by pigs. Erysipelas, which is a highly infectious skin disease. Japanese encephalitis, a viral disease that can be spread by mosquitoes and can cause disease in humans, pigs, and horses. Toxoplasmosis, a disease that can be carried by feral swine. Tularemia, a disease that can be carried by feral swine. These are the following diseases that can be carried by dogs, cats, rodents. Carnivores, due to this reason, carnivores accumulate higher levels of toxins, bacteria, and heavy metals in their flesh. They are prone to parasitic infections because they eat meat. They carry diseases like rabies, toxoplasmosis, and leptospirosis. Rodents and camels. Rodents are major carriers of plague, hantavirus, leptospirosis, and other deadly diseases. Camels carry Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS-CoV, a highly fatal viral disease. Seafood carry the following, and they're lumped into the categories of shellfish, catfish, and sharks. The particular animals subject to this: shellfish, meaning lobster, shrimp, crabs, and oysters; catfish, eels, sharks, etc. They are considered shellfish, filter feeders and toxic accumulation. Shellfish, shrimp, crabs, and oysters filter waste and toxins from the ocean, including sewage, heavy metals, and industrial chemicals. They can carry paralytic shellfish poisoning, or PSP, Vibrio bacteria, and hepatitis A. They are high in cholesterol. Shellfish are among the highest in harmful cholesterol, increasing cardiovascular disease risk. Catfish are considered bottom feeders with toxic buildup. Catfish consume dead organisms and pollutants, accumulating mercury, pesticides, and industrial waste. They frequently carry parasitic infections. Sharks carry heavy metal poisoning. Sharks accumulate high levels of mercury and lead, which cause neurological disorders and birth defects. Birds, vultures, hawks, owls, seagulls, and bats. The ones specifically mentioned here are birds of prey such as eagles, vultures, hawks, owls, scavengers, meaning ravens and seagulls, and bats. They are a high toxin load. They eat carrion, which is rotting flesh, carrying bacteria and toxins that can be transferred to humans. They are high in heavy metals and environmental pollutants. Bats are major disease carriers. Bats are reservoirs for rabies, Marburg virus, Ebola, and coronavirus, and general SARS and COVID-19. Their feces, guano, carry histoplasmosis, which is a dangerous fungal infection. Insects, the ones that are allowed, which are locusts and others being forbidden. The unclean insects would be flies, beetles, ants, cockroaches, etc. Clean insects would be locusts, crickets, grasshoppers. Again, we've talked about that before, certain kinds. The disease-carrying insects like cockroaches, flies, and beetles carry pathogens like Salmonella, E. coli, and parasitic worms. Many insects feed on feces, decaying matter, and garbage, making them unsanitary for consumption. Reptiles and amphibians such as snakes, frogs, turtles, and lizards, specifically snakes, frogs, lizards, turtles, and crocodiles. They are heavy in bacterial load. They carry Salmonella, E. coli, botulism bacteria. Amphibians like frogs secrete toxins through their skin that can be harmful. Turtles are a high Salmonella risk. Over 90% of turtles carry Salmonella, which is deadly to humans. So, yet again, I know that kind of goes hand in hand with the article we read before, but it also goes to a little bit deeper perspective. And also, talking about rabbits. People say, oh, rabbits, and they're so cute, and I know a lot of people, I know a lot of your more rural hunters like to partake in squirrel meat, rabbit meat. Those old pioneer frontier stories, that rabbit was a staple. I get those old rural wives' tales and staples, especially here in the U.S., where you have a lot of your good old-fashioned country boys who say that squirrel if made right is good and rabbit, but a very particular reason why that rabbit is bad is because some herbivorous animals consume part of their own feces, thus recovering fermentation products that have passed through the digestive tract. This process of reingestion of feces occurs in many rodents. The reingestion of feces is an especially well-developed practice in lagomorphs, or that's the proper name for rabbits and hares, and it is important for their adequate nutrition. So not only can you contract certain diseases from rabbits like you can other unclean mammals, such as tularemia is one. Not only can you contract certain diseases from eating rabbit due to their diet, but rabbits also like to consume part of their own feces. Now, I don't know about you, but I do not want to partake in eating any kind of an animal that eats its own feces. So, in conclusion, what do we understand about the scientific and biological reasons behind why Father gave us clean and unclean animals? Or as the modern Hebraic community calls it, kosher and non-kosher. Why? It has everything to do with our health, our safety, and even the ecological sustainment of our environment. Animals like carnivorous predators that are helped to kill off the animals that are considered edible and clean, killing off the old, the sick, the weak. Carnivorous animals carry a whether birds, land-based animals, or mammals, they are meant to perform a very particular job in the natural world, more specifically in helping to make sure that the animals that are considered clean are kept free of disease and sickness transmitted through, such as you have a sick cow or a sick sheep. Well, when a predator gets into the paddock, or they go out on the pasture and they hunt the livestock, they're almost always going to go after the old and the sick first. And even if it's not pastoral animals, even if it's not livestock, in general, animals that prey on others, carnivores, they indeed do help to keep the old and sick population of animals to a minimum, as well as overpopulation. That's a big deal. They help keep the overpopulation of certain animal species from getting out of control. Animals that are considered clean, ruminant animals, animals that you put out to pasture, livestock, they, environmentally speaking, they are able to make use of geographical locations and terrain that otherwise farmers would be unable to make use of, because due to a lack of rainfall or other geological features, typical farming produce cannot be yielded in areas considered pastoral geography. So you put animals out to pasture in these areas, and it makes use of that tract of land so that you, as a person, can benefit as a human from that otherwise worthless, unusable land through allowing your livestock to go out and graze, and the plant life that they eat, because the ruminant animals, it allows them to maximize the nutrition from the plant food they're eating, which by extension allows them to then produce things like milk, which we partake of in forms of dairy, milk, and cheese. And it also, due to their diet, allows them to, in of themselves, become a healthier source of meat for us to eat and consume, with less potential risk of disease. The same can be said for sea life, shellfish, crustacean, bottom dwellers. They are meant to be the garbage disposals. They are meant to help clean and keep the oceans for us and for the natural world, for our natural ecosystem. They are meant to help clean up the oceans from pollutants, refuse, decaying matter. Their reason for existing in the oceans, in the bodies of water in the world that they are found in, is to help to keep these bodies of water clean. If we fish these animals out, especially the ones that are considered commercial delicacies, I mean, fish are all around the world. Shrimp are fished commercially by untold numbers every single year. If instead of fishing shrimp out of the oceans, out of the bodies of water they're found, if instead they were left to be where they are, and the bodies of the water in the world are vast, if shrimp were left alone to do their job, crab was left alone, lobster was left alone, shrimp, so their numbers could promulgate, could grow, we will probably start seeing a much cleaner trend begin to develop in our oceans over a period of a few generations, because the animals that were created by Father to keep the bodies of water that they are fished out of, the oceans and other areas of water that they're found, Father put them there to help keep those areas clean in a way that we can't do. And if we left them alone, again, the waters would probably start getting a lot cleaner. Now, and of course, that would take a lot of effort on humans' part as well to not dump and pollute into the waters of the world. But still, if we left those creatures alone, it is undeniable that it would have a positive benefit on our environment. So not only are we supposed to leave the unclean animals alone that Father prohibited to us because, one, they're unclean. They are disease ridden. It is easy. It is very easy for us to contract diseases from these animals, whether they're swine or whether they're birds of prey or crustacean, sea life. Some people would argue and say, well, yeah, but I mean, if you cook them right, if you make them right, well, it mitigates the possibility of contracting disease. Mitigation is not the same of complete nullification. So if so many of the diseases that have run rampant in and plagued this world, I mean, think about just since the world has become a more interconnected unit. Now, with international travel being so easy, the nations of the world are literally interlocked. Look at just over the last 100 years. Look at how many diseases and sicknesses have went rampant and have been transmitted globally. And how many people in the world, from nation to nation, here in the U.S., all the way to the Far East, look at how many people in the world today eat unclean animals. Every nation in the whole world partakes in the eating of unclean animals. So, to put it into perspective, into a mathematical perspective, you might have maybe one person out of 10 or 100 who is eating unclean animals, and maybe the other 10 or the other 100, maybe they're not. But we're not dealing with numbers like that. Take the entire body of the world, billions and billions of people. So billions of people are eating swine. Billions of people are eating birds of prey, or they're eating blood, or they're eating crustaceans, shellfish. So billions of people are now partaking of these animals, and that takes the transmission rate of potential contraction of disease, and it skyrockets it, because all it takes is one person to eat swine, to eat a pig who does have one of those diseases. All it takes is one person to eat it, that unclean animal, and then they contract the disease that pig had from the meat they ate, and then everybody else who did not eat that infected pork. Now, every other person is going to be liable to contract that disease that person who is now a carrier of it has contracted themselves. So it doesn't matter. You can use the argument, well, but I mean, the chance of me, just by myself, ever contracting a harmful, life-threatening disease from eating pork or eating shrimp or lobster or mollusks or whatever, clams, that's insignificant. I mean, that likely would never happen. Well, maybe it won't happen to you, but think of how many people around the world are eating that stuff. And again, all it takes is one person to eat one bad, unclean animal, one that does have one of those diseases. All it takes is one person to eat it, contract it. And now it's spreading. Now it's gone. Now it is a contagion. Now it is broken out. Now it becomes a pandemic. So you can't use the excuse and say, well, I'm just one person. Because everybody uses that same excuse. Everybody says, well, I'm just one person, but then everybody else is doing the same thing. Again, you need to look no farther than just our society here in the United States of America. You can get bacon-flavored almost everything. I've literally heard of bacon-flavored milkshakes. I mean, that's disgusting, just the thought of it, but still. Pork is a major dietary staple with just Americans. I mean, that one article, 50 pounds. Most Americans eat 50 pounds of pork a year. Of all that pork being eaten, you better guarantee it's common sense that of all the pork being slaughtered and eaten, there's going to be at least one pig who is diseased. And that massive body of swine being farmed and slaughtered for food consumption, one of those pigs are going to be carrying one of those diseases. And all it takes is the one, and one person eating it, and now a disease has broken out. If people stopped eating these unclean animals completely, stopped eating pork, stopped eating shellfish, left these animals alone to do what Father naturally made them to do, not only would our ecosystem, not only would our environment become cleaner and more self-sustaining, because now we're not killing the animals that Father put here naturally to serve a very different purpose, not as food for us, but as a purpose for the environment, for the world we live in. Not only would our environment get healthier, not only will we see a change in the state of the health and condition of the oceans, but also even in our terrestrial domain, meaning our land-based domain. But you would literally see, if everybody in the world today, if there was a worldwide ban of prohibition on no longer eating unclean meat, if that happened in just 2 generations, you would start to see a drop-off of the diseases that run rife in this world. Because think about it. Swine flu breaks out, and it contracts and spreads to, however many states, or if it's like here in the U.S., and it ravages however many people, and then eventually it goes away. But the cause for that initial contraction, that contagion, it's not going to go away, it's not going to end, because people are still eating pork, people are still eating swine. So all it's going to take is that disease breaking out again sometime later, because someone eats a swine, someone eats pig that has that pathogen, they eat it, and they contract it, and then they spread it again. If you cut off the source of the contagions and the diseases and the pathogens, if you cut these things off at the root, at the base cause, you are going to see eventually, over a period of time, you're going to see those diseases start to disappear. It is no secret, it is no surprise that ever since the world started en masse sharing in this custom of doing exactly what Father told us not to do, and eating all of the animals, every animal literally that is unclean. Humans today eat every single animal in every facet and every way that Father deemed unclean. They eat blood, they eat birds of prey, they eat mammals that are not to be eaten, they eat practically anything and everything they find in the water. Ever since man started to do that, especially as the world became interconnected in more modern times, diseases have run rife. Yes, there are other reasons for all the diseases, but that is one such reason. Father commanded us a reason for everything that he tells us to do and not to do. Everything has a reason, everything has a point, and if we ignore him, and if we just do what we want to do because, well, the pork tastes good. Well, for one, I don't think pork tastes good. I think it's nasty. But for those that do, well, because it tastes good, it's yummy. Okay, so great. You're going to eat something. You're going to make a violation of what Father commanded us to do, or not do in this case, concerning unclean animals, and you're going to do it anyway just because it tastes good. Well, by the definition of that, I mean, if you're going to say, I'm going to do it because it tastes good, well, then we might as well go out and do anything else we want to do because it feels good, or because it makes us feel happy. So by that definition, then, sky's the limit. Do whatever you want to do. If that's your argument, well, it tastes good, I like it, it's yummy. Or my parents have done it for years, my grandparents. Generationally, my family's done it for a long time, so I'm going to keep doing it. There's no good reason or no good excuse to ever keep doing something, that Father says not to do. And he's got a reason. And if we don't listen to him and we do it anyway, we see the repercussions. We suffer from the repercussions and the ramifications of disobedience through things like just with eating unclean animals. Diseases become rife. Our environment suffers. Because now we're doing things that Father did not naturally intend for us to do. We are now making a dietary staple of animals that he did not give us for food. So it's our fault. The repercussions of those actions, and therefore the diseases and sicknesses and the people that have died and people get sick, it's our fault. We did it to ourselves. You can't blame Father. You can't blame it on just some natural occurrence. It's our fault. We did it. We can end it. We can stop it by just stop eating the foods Father says don't eat. And don't go to the scriptures. Don't go to the Bible and use that as an excuse and say, well, but the scriptures say it's okay for me to. No, don't do that. Don't go to the scriptures and don't nitpick and hodgepodge scriptures together from here and here and here and wrench them out of context to try to force the scriptures to convey what you want it to convey, in saying that, oh no, all the unclean food's now clean and okay, when contextually, exegetically speaking, no, nowhere in the scriptures does it support or convey this notion or this theory that now, just because of Yahshua, the Kashrut, the dietary laws have been abolished and that unclean animals are now suddenly clean? So don't go to the scriptures and try to use them as an excuse for your disobedience. Don't do that. Because as we've already covered now in the first two parts of this video, the scriptures are not on your side and they do not support your conclusion. So don't use them. And not only is the scriptures not on your side, but biologically and scientifically speaking, that's not on your side either, because partaking of these disease-ridden or potentially disease-ridden unclean animals is a very real repercussion that you may face by eating them. And even if you don't, because so many other people in the world do, our world has been stricken with disease and sickness in part because of that. So, does Yahshua's sacrifice abolish the Kashrut, the dietary law? In conclusion, with the third part of this series on Kashrut, on the dietary laws, no, it most certainly does not. We know this now for an undeniable fact after looking through the scriptures, after looking at Yahshua's own words, looking at the instance when he went to theological toe, per se, with the Pharisees, and he dealt with the matter concerning unwashed hands, concerning the vision that Peter had about the animals on the sheet, concerning all the writings of Shaul that people wrench out of context. We have, over this three-part video series, we have looked at every scripture, we have exegetically dissected them, and we have properly interpreted them in the light of the contextual narrative that they are meant to be understood. We also, today, looked at, from a biological, scientific, secular perspective, why that the unclean animals that were considered unclean and non-kosher are indeed considered non-kosher, and why we are to avoid them. It is undeniable. No different than Shabbat was not done away with or abolished when Yahshua's sacrifice was made, or the Moedim, the feasts. In the same way, the Kashrut, the dietary laws, are still very much in effect. And I have great confidence in saying that after this three-part video series, there is no longer any question lingering as to why that this is not the case, that the Kashrut, the dietary laws, were abolished. So, thank you for sticking with me through this very long, extensive three-part series. We are not yet done with Torah. We are going to continue to look at a couple other aspects and facets of the Torah, of the law. We may start looking into things like the Jubilee, or the 7th year of rest and debt forgiveness. We may also look at things such as the wearing of certain materials, why that you're not to wear material clothing of more than one kind or made of more than one material. So we're going to look at a couple other things. I'm not sure what we're going to do yet. We might look at the 7th year of debt forgiveness next. We may look at Jubilees next. I'm not sure. Now that this series is done, I'll have to think about and let Father lead me on exactly what next set of the Torah laws that he wants me to expound on. But as soon as I have the resources for the next installment ready to go, then I'll be back and we'll continue with our next series, or installment in our next series on Torah. And with all that said, I hope you guys have a wonderful day. If you have anything that you would like me to specifically talk about, if you would have anything that you would like me to broach, then please, or questions you have that you would like me to do a video on, just shoot me a comment down below this video and I'll look at it, and we might do a one-off video on it, or depending on the content, I may do a series on it. So thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Shalom.